Good afternoon. Nothing says summer like literally passing a hat and then and then having me up here. So don't laugh that hard. Okay. Thanks. So we have been doing a summer series called Construction Tales, in which we're speaking about the ways that we've been built up by the church. And for me, certainly there are a number of places and spaces in which this has happened. Thinking narrowly about church being Sunday services. Certainly over the years, I've had a lot of great teaching and preaching that I've heard. Being together worshiping has been a very formational thing. Praying together, as we just did, has been a helpful thing over the years. And I think the simple habit of showing up. Sometimes I'm not keen on getting myself to church, and on many occasions, having come away being with brothers and sisters has exceeded my expectations. Certainly also the church wider, small groups have been very helpful for me. The larger church body is sometimes a little big for us to really get to know each other, right? But a small group is a great place to get to know a smaller number of people and get to know them better, and they get to know you better. And certainly our current small group has been a real blessing to me. Other focused gatherings over the years, things like Alpha programs, the Reframe program, being part of music ministry, going to Camp Homewood. There's a long list of things that have been helpful to me and in my formation. And I think that any time that there is a learning together, a working together, a talking together, a praying together, a being together, there is formation. Which is also why, from a parachurch point of view, our involvement with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship's Pioneer Camp has been really formational for me. Yes, I started there as a kid, and then especially as a teen. It was a very helpful time in forming my faith. But it didn't stop there. It's continued as we've moved into other participation and leadership things at this camp. There's been an ongoing community of formation for me there. I also want to acknowledge that church experiences have not always been healthy or helpful for me, and I suspect the same for many of you. Yet I'm thankful that even in those times, and maybe sometimes after those times, God has used those troubles for shaping and learning. So what about this process of construction and building and shaping? How do we grow and change anyways? Early in the book of Ephesians, Paul has been using this metaphor of temple, and we've spent quite a bit of time talking about temple and this idea of how we are built up in that way. In Ephesians 4, Paul changes his metaphor more to that of a body. And how does it get built and formed? So what is Paul's view of this construction process? A few weeks back, Julia spoke on 4:7, which is this idea that each of us brings Christ's grace, a gift to each other, to the body. Julia mentioned how important encouragement can be in our lives. Here in Ephesians 4, Paul begins by appealing for unity, which is something that, in speaking from Galatians, Krista also talked about last week. I think the key here is that unity is not uniformity. We're not all meant to be the same. There are a variety of gifts, a variety of ways of contributing to the building up of the church. And that is why the body metaphor is a rich one. Different parts are required to have the body working, pulling, as it were, in the same direction. A unity of purpose and vision requires a variety of parts. But they work best when each is mature and growing as they ought. That also means that the way you grow might be a little bit different from the way that I grow. We have different things to add or change. I recently read that pride is when we limit who we think we can learn from. Pride is when we limit who we think we can learn from, right? When you think you have nothing to learn except from maybe some rarefied expert, you cut yourself off from others, from the body. It takes humility to see that you can learn something from everyone, to be open to the gift that someone else might bring. Each person who walks through the door has a gift that the rest of us together don't yet have. So looking at this section of Ephesians 4, let's watch some of the verbs, see the ways Paul describes this building up of the body. So I don't know if it's going to be a bit of a race here, so if you have your text open, that's great. Otherwise, I'll sort of read the context. In verse 12, Paul talks about building up the body of Christ. So that one's pretty simple. Things are added together. There's a building up, right? And in 13, he says, all of us come to the unity of the faith and knowledge and maturity to the measure of the full stature of Christ. It's like we're being stretched up to match the model of Jesus, or like being poured maybe upside down into a mold of him. And in 15, we must grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ. So again, there's this stretching up of the body to grow into the head, his head, Christ's head, which is set in place. The shape which we are to take is already there. We're meant to sort of fill it. And finally in 16, he says, we are to be joined and knit together by every ligament with which it is equipped, each part working properly, which promotes the body's growth in building itself up in love. So again, we see that individual parts are needed to make the body, added on and knit together from the inside. Then the body takes its proper shape, has its proper function. So it seems to me that in reading this section, that this construction / building / forming / sculpting process happens both, and this is important, on an individual level as well as to all of us together, to the larger body. We each are to look like Christ, and the body together is to look like Christ. Okay, so how does this happen? It sounds laborious and maybe even a little painful. I took note as I was writing this, after I'd written this, I heard Yuri talking about this, and he talked about building and renovating, and this idea of exciting or inciting something inside you. And it's interesting, there's some overlap in the things I have to say. So reading verse 22 to 24, let me just read that again. You were taught to put away your former way of life, your old self, corrupt and deluded by its lusts, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to clothe yourself with the new self, created according to the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. So Paul talks about 3 ways that this building, this formation happens. Number 1 is you put away your former life, your former way of life. There are some things that we need to get rid of, to remove, to chisel off. And then he says to be renewed in the spirit of your minds. There's a refining of our inward being, a purifying that has to happen. And then this idea of clothing yourself with the new self. There are things to add that we don't have that will make us more the selves we were meant to be. So to change the order slightly, there are things we need to remove, there's things we need to add, and the whole of our deepest selves need refining. So this sounds to me like 3 ways you might make a sculpture, right? First one is removal. You get the chisel out, and in stone or wood, you chip away that which is not like what you are making. You might have seen those Michelangelo sculptures, the slaves that are half finished, and there's stone, and he's chipped out, and you start to see this form emerging, but he's stopped. It hasn't all come to be yet. Apparently he was asked, how do you see that in the marble? And he said, well, I just see it, and then I just take away the parts that aren't it. It's like, okay, thank you. Now we can all buy a slab of marble. So that's one way, the removal, the chisel. Secondly, there's the additive. There's the potter with the clay, right? Building with clay, you're adding to the form the things that need to be there, right? It grows as you build it. And then third, being renewed, refining. Before you pour that bronze or gold or whatever material into that mold, into the shape that you are forming, you must have a purified material. Then you can cast it to the shape that's already envisioned, already formed, literally formed after the original. Now, there are a couple shortcomings to my metaphor. You can think of more, I'm sure. But I need your help. I need you to sort of use your imagination. One problem is this idea that, sculpture is dead, right? We need to imagine a living figure being cut out, right? Being freed from the stone that's containing it and constraining it, right? Think of animation. What would Pixar do with this, or claymation? Remember those claymation things from the 60s and 70s? So we need something living. Also, it's on a pedestal, right? And we're not on pedestals, most of us. Instead, we're meant to be walking, right? Walking with the Spirit, right? We need the breath that we heard from Ezekiel today, right? So the second sort of limitation is perfectionism. We fall into this one quite quickly. Sculpture is a finished work, and it seems perfect. But we can't let our perfectionism take away our ability to see the good, right? We can't look for perfection here. We need to look with a hopeful eye. Again, we need to imagine maybe an artist studio. There are bits of stone on the floor, maybe plaster, dust everywhere, maybe the smell of the kiln baking away. Your artist friend shows you what they're working on. You back up to take it all in, and through the dust and the incompleteness of it all, you say, yeah, I see this taking shape. Oh, wow, that's going to be great. So with these sculpture images in mind, we can actually continue on and read the rest of the letter, the rest of Ephesians. You can look this up later. I'll throw a few at you. This idea of chiseling. Paul says in 4:25, put away falsehood, right? Get rid of it. He tells thieves they should stop stealing. Stop. In 29, let no evil talk come from your mouth. And in 31, put away all bitterness, wrath, anger, wrangling, and malice. Get rid of these. Cut them off. I love that word wrangling. I think that's what we do with wild horses, right? How often in our families or in our relationships are we wrangling, right? We're twisting and squirming and trying to get an advantage over someone for our selfish intentions, right? Paul says, get rid of these. Chisel them off. And then see what you have. Okay, take a step back. Yeah, I see this taking shape. Oh, wow, that's going to be great. Second image, this idea of the potter, right? As we go through the rest of Ephesians, in 4:28, Paul has just said to the thieves, stop stealing. But he doesn't stop there. He says, let them labor and work. Add something useful and fulfilling to your life, and therefore also to others. And he says, speak what is useful and give grace. Be kind, tender-hearted, forgiving. In 5:4, he says, speak thanks. And in verse 10 of chapter 5, he kind of has the wild card coupon. He says, try to find out what pleases God. So he's not being exhaustive. And I think from here we could look back, as Krista did last week, at Galatians 5, and we could think of the fruits of the Spirit, right? Things we need to add that we don't have. Love, joy, peace, patience. Patience. Who of us needs patience, right? Or Ephesians 6, the armor of God. Paul goes on to talk about the armor, the things that we need, to be fitted, to be his people. These are things we don't naturally have. We need God to give us these gifts. Then suddenly we become a gift for others. Take a step back. Yeah, I can see this taking shape. Oh, wow, that's going to be great. Finally, this idea of casting, filling a mold with purified material. This has to do, I think, a lot with our deeper insides, where we live from. In 5:1, Paul says, live in love. I think this speaks to an inner transformation, right, of a refining. In 5:8, he said, you are light, live that way. Wow. In 14, he says, awake, rise, right? Be animated, live a life lit up from the inside. And in 5:18, he's just said, don't get drunk. And he says, be filled with the Spirit. I think it's also helpful for me to borrow from James 1 here, where a little bit like what Steve spoke about a few weeks ago, about trials. And James says, consider it pure joy when you go through trials, right? Because if we let them, those experiences mature us and make us not be double-minded, trying to serve two masters, maybe God and money, or God and politics, or fame or desires. Or maybe it's something more subtle, like not giving our all to God as a means of self-protection. I'm not always sure that I trust God to be good to me. I'd better watch out for myself a little, right? But it makes my faith, my trust, less pure. That cast sculpture cannot stand if the material is not pure. It buckles and folds in on itself, on its weak spot. But Jesus came to transform our insides, our motives, our emotions, our conflicts, our thinking, our passions, our shame. And let's let him do this. So sometimes Jesus comes to us with a chisel. Doug, there's this thing that has to go. We have to remove it. It makes you not look like me. Sometimes Jesus comes to us with a gift. You'll look more like me if you have this gift, this fruit, this capacity, this thing that you do not have. Sometimes Jesus comes to refine us. We need to make your insides be more like me, purified, not caught up and conflicted, so that you can look and act more like me. Take a step back. Yeah, I see this taking shape. Oh wow, that's going to be great. So I'll tell you my own construction tale. How God has been forming me and my being built up by my brothers and sisters. I mentioned summer camp. Through a combination of quite amazing things, Jackie and I had the chance to help direct a summer camp early this July for some 120 refugees, mostly Afghan and Kurds, displaced people, as we prayed for today. And this was called Newcomers Camp. I have to tell you, it was one of the most amazing and God-directed weeks of my life. And I kind of needed that. Those who know me know I had a pretty tough spring. We had the support and encouragement from so many places. Our small group held us up, and many of you here prayed for us and encouraged us and listened to us go on and on about it. Friends from our camp community, new and old, supported us, taught us, and worked with us. Our spring planning meetings turned into the July reality of cooking and cleaning and hosting, and we sensed that as a team, we were being knit together as a body, our different roles and gifts all pulling in the same direction. In February, Mike had given a sermon on hospitality, which ended up forming my vision for this whole project. He spoke from Acts 16 about how Lydia was welcomed by Paul into the group of Christian believers in such a way, in such a radical way, that she turned around and welcomed them into her home. She became the host. Those Christians welcomed with open hands, not controlling hands. After a week of growing and sharing together, on the last night of Newcomers Camp, we celebrated an Afghan wedding. It was planned. This was not a flash mob wedding. As a director, that would have been too much. But in which our Afghan friends were in the camp kitchen, our camp kitchen, and preparing a banquet to which we were invited. That night, we became the guests. They served us. I could feel Jesus chiseling me. I felt faint stereotypes about culture and religion being cut away from me as I bonded with people from a world away who are now our friends. I sensed God adding to me a gift for hospitality and welcome far beyond what I was capable of. I felt a deep refinement going on, a sense of peace as I trusted God, not my own capacity. He made me more open to what he had put right in front of me. Take a step back. Yeah, I can see this taking shape. That's going to be great. Amen.